The planet Kale Prime was burning. It had been burning for 6 days straight, and no one had been able to stop it. From orbit, the fires looked like orange scars spread across the dark surface of the planet. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were now nothing more than ash and broken stone. The Vreth Dominion had come, and as always, they had brought destruction with them. Vreth were not an easy enemy to explain. They were not simply soldiers or warriors. They were something older and darker than that. They were a hive-mind species, each soldier connected to a central intelligence, each one bred and shaped from birth to fight, to kill, and to conquer. Their bodies were hard like armor. Their claws could tear through steel plating. Their minds were cold and precise. They had no fear. They had no mercy. In 600 years of conquest, they had never lost a planetary siege. Not once. The Galactic Conclave had been fighting them for 60 years. 60 years of war. 60 years of retreating, of losing worlds, of watching civilizations disappear. The Conclave was made up of 47 different species, all of them intelligent, many of them old and wise and powerful in their own way. But against the Vreth, wisdom and power had not been enough. Against the Vreth, nothing had ever been enough. Kale Prime was supposed to be different. It was a core world, heavily fortified, home to over 2 billion lives. 3 allied species had sent their best military forces to defend it. The Tharan had sent their elite armored columns. The Sarath had sent their long-range artillery platforms. The Duvani had sent their fleet of interceptor ships. Together, they had believed they could hold the line. The Vreth shattered that line in 48 hours. Now, the Conclave's high command sat in emergency session aboard their command station above the planet. The mood in the room was beyond despair. Generals and admirals who had spent their entire careers in war sat silently, staring at maps that showed red spreading across the surface of Kale Prime like blood spreading through water. It was Tharan Admiral Shaveth who finally spoke. He was old, even by Tharan standards. His gray-scaled face was carved with lines of age and experience. He had fought in 30 campaigns. He had lost more than he had won. He looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues and saw what he had feared most. They had run out of ideas. "We have one option remaining," he said. His voice was low and steady, even though his hands were not. "The humans have offered assistance." The room changed, not loudly. There were no shouts or arguments, but there was a shift, a collective discomfort, the kind that moves through a room like a cold wind. Humanity was new to the Conclave. They had joined only 11 years ago, a small and strange species from a single blue planet on the edge of the known galaxy. Most of the older species viewed them with a kind of polite distance. They were short-lived, emotional, and chaotic. Their technology was decent but not exceptional. Their population was large, but their military had never been tested against anything like the Vreth. Many in the Conclave felt that accepting human help was an act of desperation, so complete it was almost embarrassing. But Shaveth was past embarrassment. He was thinking about 2 billion lives on the surface below him. "What exactly are they offering?" asked General Ferrith of the Sarath. His 4 eyes narrowed with suspicion. "A specialist unit," Shaveth said. "That is all they called it, a small specialist unit." Ferrith made a sound that in his species meant something close to a laugh. "A specialist unit, against 40,000 Vreth soldiers and 3 siege carriers. How many are in this unit?" Shaveth looked down at the communication record in front of him. He had read the number several times already, and still was not entirely sure he believed it. 12, he said. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Then Ferrith laughed again, and this time it was not just a sound. 12. They are sending 12 soldiers to a siege that broke 3 full military forces in 2 days. They called them their best, Shaveth said quietly. Their best 12. Ferrith shook his head slowly. I understand that humans are optimistic by nature, but this is something else. This is delusion. Shaveth did not argue. He simply made the approval. What else was there to do? The human transport arrived without ceremony. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel about 2,000 kilometers from the command station, and it was not at all what anyone had expected. It was small, matte black, with no visible markings, no running lights, no identification signals until it was specifically asked to provide them. It looked, to the Tharan officers who first spotted it, like a shadow that had decided to take a shape. It docked quietly. 12 humans walked off the ramp. Shavath had reviewed human physical profiles before they arrived. He knew that humans were considered medium-sized by galactic standards, bipedal with soft skin and no natural armor. He had expected them to look fragile, and in a way they did. They had no exoskeleton, no visible biological weapons, no enhanced limbs. But there was something else, something that was harder to name. They moved differently than he had expected. There was no wasted movement in any of them. Every step was placed with a kind of quiet certainty, like each of them had already calculated exactly where they needed to be and was simply executing that plan. Their eyes moved constantly, scanning rooms, checking angles, noting exits, watching everything without appearing to watch anything. They were dressed in dark, layered gear that carried equipment Shavath's intelligence team had not been fully able to identify. They carried weapons that looked compact but heavy with purpose. They spoke to each other in short, clipped phrases. Some did not speak at all. Their leader stepped forward. She was not the largest of the group, but she was the one the others oriented around, the way smaller ships orient around a station. Her name, according to the file, was Master Sergeant Dara Kale. She had dark eyes that were calm in a way that felt less like peace and more like deep water still on the surface, with unknown things moving below. She looked at Shavath and gave a short, respectful nod. "Admiral," she said, "we'd like to see the terrain maps, the Vreth force distribution, and whatever sensor data you have on their command structure. As soon as possible, please." Not a greeting, not a speech, a request for information. Shavath found himself responding before he had consciously decided to. He led them to the briefing room. For 6 hours, the 12 humans studied the maps and said almost nothing. They passed data tablets among themselves. A few made small marks on physical paper, actual paper, which several conclave officers found oddly fascinating. One of them, a very large human with a blonde beard and quiet eyes, sat on the floor instead of a chair and ate something from a small packet without looking up from the map he was reading. General Ferrith stood in the doorway of the briefing room for a while, watching them. He was looking for something, some sign of the confidence that would justify sending 12 beings into a war that had consumed armies. He did not find it. They did not look confident. They did not look afraid either. They simply looked busy. At one point, a young Tharan officer named Velash, assigned to observe the humans and report on their behavior, leaned close to Sergeant Kale and asked, carefully, what their plan was. She looked up at him. Her expression was not unfriendly, but it was precise. "We're still building it," she said. "We don't plan from assumptions, we plan from data." "And when you have enough data?" Velash asked. "Then we'll know what's possible," she paused, "and what isn't." Velash waited for more. Nothing came. She had already looked back down at the map. He stepped away and wrote in his report, "They are either very calm or very strange, possibly both." At the 6-hour mark, Sergeant Kale stood up. She placed both hands flat on the map table, looked at her team, and said 7 words in a quiet voice that somehow carried clearly through the room. "All right, we know what we're doing." The others began to move. Equipment was checked. Communications were tested. Small items were passed between team members, things Velash could not fully identify, but which were handled with the care people reserve for things they depend on completely. General Ferrith appeared in the doorway again. He looked at the 12 humans preparing to descend to the surface of a burning planet to face 40,000 of the most dangerous soldiers in the known galaxy, and he felt something he had not expected to feel. Not confidence, not yet. Something smaller than that, something that sat in his chest like a warm stone. He had fought in many wars. He had seen many different kinds of soldiers prepare for battle. He had seen bravery and fear and everything in between. But he had never seen anything quite like this. 12 beings preparing with the calm, steady focus of people who had done something like this before and expected to do it again. He found himself speaking before he meant to. "You know what waits for you down there," he said. It was not really a question. Sergeant Kale looked at him. "Yes." "And you are not," he paused, searching for the human word, "afraid?" She considered the question seriously, which he had not expected. "Fear is a tool," she said at last. "We use it, we don't let it drive." Ferrith stood there for a moment after they left. Then he turned to Velash and said, very quietly, "I do not know if they are brave or if they are broken." Velash watched the humans board their insertion craft. "I am not sure," he said, "that there is a difference." The black transport descended into the smoke and fire of Kale Prime. In the Vreth command tent on the surface, a sensor operator noticed 12 new human life signs entering the exclusion zone. He flagged it, as protocol required. The report moved up the chain to the Vreth siege commander, a massive creature called the Iron Matron, who had commanded 30 sieges and won all of them. She read the report: 12 humans on foot, no armored support, no air cover, moving into the city ruins on the eastern edge of the perimeter. She stared at the report for a long moment. Then she dismissed it. 12 was not a military number. 12 was a mistake, or a scouting party, or perhaps some form of alien ritual she did not understand. It did not matter. Whatever 12 humans thought they were going to do in her siege zone, it would be over quickly. She moved on to other reports. That night the Vreth perimeter was quiet. But in the darkness of the ruined city, 12 pairs of eyes were open, and 12 minds were already working, and the trap that no one had yet seen was already beginning to close. The city of Verk had once been beautiful. It had wide stone roads that curved between tall buildings made of pale blue mineral, a material native to Kale Prime that caught light in a way that made the whole city glow softly at dawn. There had been parks and water channels and markets that ran day and night. 2 billion people had called this planet home. Now Verk was a skeleton. The buildings still stood in many places, but their interiors had been burned out. The water channels were dry, filled with ash and broken things. The roads were cracked and dark with scorch marks from Vreth energy weapons. The only lights came from Vreth patrol units moving in slow, precise formations through the ruins, their sensor arrays sweeping back and forth like the eyes of something patient and very hungry. The 12 humans moved through this place like they had been born in it. They split into 3 groups of 4 before they even entered the city. No signal was given that Velash, watching from the command station's orbital sensors, could detect. They simply separated, each group taking a different route, and then they disappeared, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, slipping into the shadows of ruined buildings and collapsed archways until the sensor feed showed almost nothing. Velash pressed his face closer to the display screen. The human's life signs were still there, faintly, if he knew exactly where to look. But the Vreth sensors, which were excellent, did not appear to be finding them at all. He wrote in his report, "They move in a way that is difficult to track even with our equipment. The Vreth patrols have passed within 30 meters of at least 2 human operators without triggering any alert. I do not yet understand how this is possible." What he did not write, because he was not sure how to put it into professional language, was that watching them move made the fur along the back of his neck stand up. The first thing the humans did was not what anyone expected. Velash had assumed, and so had General Ferrith, and so had Admiral Shaveth, that the 12 operators would find a position, set up some kind of fortification, and begin attacking Vreth patrols. That was what soldiers did. They found the enemy and they fought the enemy. The humans did not fight anyone. Not for the first 2 days. Instead, they watched. They collected information with tools that Velash's team could barely identify from the orbital feed. They tracked patrol routes and timing. They mapped the locations of Vreth sensor towers. They identified which units carried communication equipment and which units did not. They found the physical routes that supply vehicles took through the ruined streets. They were building something, not a weapon, a picture. On the third night, they began to act, and when they did, Velash almost missed it entirely, because what they did not look like combat. A Vreth patrol route changed, not because the humans attacked the patrol, but because something in the ruins made a sound that the Vreth sensors flagged as a possible structural collapse. The patrol diverted to investigate. While they were gone from their original route, something happened at the position they had left unguarded. Velash reviewed the sensor data 3 times before he understood. A Vreth communication relay station had gone dark, not destroyed, simply offline, quietly, without explosion or noise. 2 hours later, a Vreth commander on the western edge of the perimeter received a signal that appeared to come from the Iron Matron herself, ordering his unit to pull back 300 meters and establish a new line. He obeyed without question. Why would he doubt a signal from command? The signal was in perfect Vreth military code. It carried the correct authentication markers. It was, of course, entirely fake. Velash stared at his display and felt something cold move through him. He opened a channel to Admiral Shaveth. "Admiral," he said carefully, "the humans are not fighting the Vreth." "Then what are they doing?" Shaveth asked. Velash paused for a long moment, trying to find the right words. "They are making the Vreth fight themselves," he said. By the 4th day, the Iron Matron knew something was wrong. She could feel it the way an old soldier feels a change in weather, not from any single fact, but from the collection of small wrongnesses that had been building up. A patrol that reported seeing nothing in Sector 7, even though Sector 7's sensor logs showed something had moved there. A communication relay that went offline and then, mysteriously, came back on again, but only after feeding 3 hours of false data to the units connected to it. A unit commander on the eastern flank, who had apparently given orders that he had absolutely no memory of giving. She called her senior commanders together and told them to review everything. Every movement, every order, every sensor log from the past 4 days. It took her staff 12 hours to put together a picture of what had been happening. When they were done, the Iron Matron sat very still and looked at the data laid out before her. The humans had not attacked a single Vreth soldier in 4 days. They had not destroyed any significant equipment. They had not taken any ground, at least not in any way that could be measured on a map. And yet, the siege was subtly wrong in 100 small ways, each one individually dismissible, but together adding up to something that made the Iron Matron's cold, precise mind feel something very close to unease. She had lost 6 soldiers in 4 days, not to battle. 3 had been found dead in locations where their own colleagues had later reported receiving orders to send them. 1 unit had spent 2 days guarding a supply corridor that, it turned out, no supply vehicles had used. 2 commanders had made decisions based on intelligence that had been quietly, carefully changed. The siege was like a machine that had been very slightly adjusted. Every gear still turned. Every part still worked. But the output was wrong and the wrongness was growing. She ordered a full security lockdown. All communications to be authenticated twice. All patrol routes to be randomized. All unit commanders to operate under the assumption of infiltration. Then she looked at her intelligence officer and asked the question that had been building for days. "Where are they?" He had no answer. On the 5th night, Velash saw something that he would not forget for the rest of his life. He was watching the sensor feed from directly above the Vreth main command area, a cluster of heavy structures in the center of the captured city, that the Vreth had converted into their operational headquarters. It was the most heavily guarded location on the surface. Multiple perimeter layers, constant patrols, aerial coverage, the best sensors the Vreth military possessed. At 300 hours local time, a single human life sign appeared inside the innermost perimeter. Velash blinked. He checked the feed again. He ran a diagnostic on the sensors to confirm they were functioning correctly. They were. There was a human inside the Vreth headquarters compound. He watched, barely breathing, for 40 minutes. The life sign moved through the compound slowly and carefully, pausing often, changing direction, navigating around patrols with a patience that seemed almost inhuman, which, Velash reflected, was perhaps the wrong word to use. Then the life sign moved to the building at the center of the compound, the structure his intelligence team had identified as the Iron Matron's personal command post, and stopped outside it for exactly 3 minutes. Then it left, moving out the way it had come, through layers of security that the Vreth believed to be impenetrable. Velash sat back in his chair. He reported what he had seen to Admiral Shaveth, who asked the obvious question, what were they doing in there? Velash did not know. He would not find out until later. What the human had done in those 3 minutes outside the Iron Matron's command post was not destructive. It was something smaller and, in its way, far more frightening. The operator had placed a device the size of a fingertip on the exterior wall of the building. A device that would, over the next 72 hours, record every sound and vibration that passed through that wall and transmit it in compressed bursts during the few-second windows when the Vreth communication arrays were cycling between frequencies. Every order the Iron Matron gave, every plan, every response to everything the humans were doing. They were not just watching the Vreth, they were reading the Vreth's mind. On the morning of the 6th day, the Iron Matron's senior intelligence commander was found by his own troops. He was alive. He was uninjured in any physical sense that medical scans could detect. He was sitting in the corner of his office, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up to his chest, making a sound that his staff had never heard a Vreth make before. He was refusing to speak. He was refusing to look at anyone. When his officers tried to help him stand, he made the sound louder. Eventually, they left him there and carried on without him. No one knew what had happened to him. No cameras had recorded anything in his office during the night. No sensors had detected any unauthorized presence. His door had been locked from the inside. He had simply been found like that in the morning, rocking back and forth, and whatever he had seen or experienced during the night had reached into the place inside him that the Vreth believed they had engineered out of existence, the place where fear lived. The report of his condition reached the Iron Matron's desk within the hour. She read it twice. Then she set it aside and called her second-in-command. "Double the guard on all senior command personnel," she said. Her second-in-command asked if she believed they were under a targeted assassination campaign. She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "I believe we are under something else. I do not have a word for what it is yet." In the ruins above the underground tunnels on the eastern side of the city, Sergeant Kale sat with her back against a broken wall and ate from a ration packet while reviewing the data that had come in from the listening device. She read quietly. Around her, the team rested in shifts. Bjorn, the large Norwegian, was asleep with his equipment still on, one hand resting near the grip of his weapon even in sleep, the way some people rest a hand on a familiar surface for comfort. Ghost Rains came in from observation, moved silently to her side, and looked over her shoulder at the data screen. "They're scared," he said. His voice was quiet and completely flat. "Starting to be," Kale said. "What's next?" She turned off the screen and looked out at the dark ruins of the city. "They're going to bring the Shriek cast," she said. "I'd put money on it." Ghost was silent for a moment. "You sure?" "It's what I do," she said. "When your standard approach stops working, you reach for the specialist." Ghost considered this. Then with a small, dry expression that was almost a smile, "Good." Kale looked at him. "Get some sleep," she said. "We're going to be busy." She was right. 36 hours later, 3 Vreth transport ships descended through the atmosphere of Kale Prime, carrying cargo that made even the Iron Matron's commanders step back when the holds were opened. The Shriek cast had arrived. And in the ruins of the city below, without being told, without needing to be, the 12 humans were already preparing to meet them. The Shriek cast were the Vreth Dominion's answer to a question no one had wanted to ask. The question was this: what do you send when your regular soldiers are not enough? The Vreth had been engineering life for 600 years. They understood biology the way other species understood mathematics, as a language that could be used to build almost anything. And the Shriek cast were one of their finest constructions, not built for open battle, not built for sieges or fleet combat or the long grinding work of conquest, built for one thing only: to hunt. They were tall, lean things, with too many joints in their limbs and a posture that never quite looked right, like the body had been assembled by someone who had only read a description of a living creature and never actually seen one. Their heads were narrow and long, with hearing organs that could detect a heartbeat through solid rock at 50 meters. Their eyes saw in multiple spectrums that most species did not even have names for. They had been engineered to produce a subsonic sound from deep in their chest cavities, a low, pulsing frequency that most biological nervous systems responded to with immediate, overwhelming terror. Not fear, terror, the kind that made armies drop their weapons and run, the kind that made trained soldiers curl up and stop functioning. Every species in the conclave had case files on Shriek cast encounters. The files were not pleasant reading. There were records of entire platoons found having run until they died from exhaustion. Records of fortified positions abandoned not because of gunfire, but because the occupants heard something in the dark and broke completely. Records of soldiers who survived Shriek encounters but never fully returned to themselves afterward. The Conclave's Behavioral Institute had concluded, after extensive study, that there was no reliable counter to the Shriek cast's fear emission. No training could override it. No drug suppressed it reliably. It operated below the level of thought, at the base level where a body simply decides it needs to survive, and all higher functions are pushed aside to make room for running. The conclusion in their final report had been grim. Shriek cast encounters are to be avoided. Engagement is not recommended. Veles read that report 3 times on the morning the Shriek cast arrived on Kale Prime. He read it because Sergeant Kale had somehow known they were coming. How she had known, he still did not entirely understand, though he suspected it had something to do with the small device that had been placed on the Iron Matron's command post. And she had calmly informed him, via the tight-band communication channel they shared, that the team would be moving underground to prepare for engagement. Veles had asked carefully whether Sergeant Kale was aware of the Conclave's official recommendation against engaging the Shriek cast. There had been a pause on the channel. "I'm aware," she said. Another pause. "We appreciate the concern," she added, and the channel had closed. Veles had sat there for a while after that. Then he had opened his report file and written, "The humans intend to engage the Shriek cast in the underground tunnel network beneath the city. I have advised them of the Conclave's recommendations. They acknowledged the information and proceeded anyway. I do not know what to make of this. I am not sure whether to be hopeful or to begin composing statements of condolence." He decided in the end not to compose the condolence statements yet. He would wait and see. The underground tunnel network beneath Verk City was a vast, old system. It had been built over many centuries, first as water infrastructure, then as transport, then as emergency shelters. In places, the tunnels were wide enough to move vehicles through. In other places, they narrowed to crawl spaces that required a person to move on their hands and knees. The lighting had failed weeks ago when the Vreth bombardment took out the city's power grid. And now the tunnels were completely dark, the kind of dark that has texture, that presses against your eyes and makes your other senses reach outward nervously. The Vreth chose the tunnels for the Shriek caste because of exactly that darkness. The Shriek caste did not need light. Their hearing and other senses made light unnecessary, and in confined dark spaces, their fear emission was amplified by the enclosed acoustics. Sound bouncing off stone walls in every direction. No escape route. Nowhere for the prey to run except deeper into the dark, which was where the Shriek caste wanted them. The Iron Matron sent 12 of them underground. She thought 12 for 12. It seemed appropriate. For the first hour, nothing happened. Velash watched his sensor feed with the intensity of someone who understood that what he was seeing might be the last moments of the only 12 humans on the planet. The Shriek caste life signs moved through the tunnels with slow, hunting patience. The human life signs were stationary, waiting in 3 separate positions, spread through the tunnel network in a pattern that Velash tried to understand but could not fully map. Then the Shriek caste found the first human position. 6 of them converged on it from 3 different tunnel branches, moving with the coordinated silence of things that had done this 1,000 times before. They were 30 meters out. 20. They opened their chest cavities and began the sound. Velash braced himself. He had seen the reports. He knew what happened next. What happened next was not in any report he had ever read. The humans did not run. They did not collapse. They did not freeze. Their life signs visible on his sensor feed stayed exactly where they had been. Their readings, he had access to basic biometric data through the suit sensors, showed elevated heart rates, elevated cortisol, elevated adrenaline. They were feeling it. Whatever the Shriek caste was putting into the dark, it was reaching them. And they stayed and they worked. Velash did not have visual access to the tunnels. He had sensor data and audio fragments, enough to get pieces, not the whole. What he received over the next 11 minutes was a collection of sounds and readings that he spent years afterward trying to fully organize in his mind. There was the sound of the Shriek caste's emission. He could detect it even on the audio sensors, a low hum that made the pickup equipment rattle slightly. There was the sound of movement in the dark, fast, careful movement. There were sounds he could not identify, not weapons fire, not explosion, not the physical impact sounds of direct combat. Something else. He would later describe them to the Behavioral Institute as controlled sounds, sounds with purpose. And then at the 11-minute mark, the Shriek caste stopped emitting. It did not fade, it did not slowly decrease. It simply stopped the way a machine stops when its power is cut. And Velash, who had been listening to that low hum through his equipment for nearly 12 minutes, felt the absence of it as something physical, a hole in the audio where something had been. 6 hours passed. Velash did not leave his station. He barely moved. Admiral Shaveth came and stood behind him for a while without speaking, watching the sensor feed. General Ferrith arrived at some point and stood in the doorway. Others came and went. No one spoke much. The sensor feed showed 12 Vreth caste life signs somewhere in the tunnel network, stationary, clustered in what appeared to be 2 groups, and scattered across the tunnels, moving slowly, methodically, checking corners and passages, 12 human life signs. Still 12, all of them. At the 6-hour mark, the human life signs began moving toward the exit point on the eastern edge of the tunnel network. Slowly at first, then at a steady pace. Velash watched them emerge one by one into the pale gray light of the Kale Prime morning. They were dark with fluid. Most of it was not their blood. Their biometric readings showed no significant injuries across any of the 12. The fluid was darker than human blood, with a different viscosity. It covered their gear and hands and in some cases their faces, and none of them seemed particularly concerned about it. They moved to a cleared area 50 meters from the tunnel entrance, and they began the same routine they did after every operation. They checked each other's equipment and injuries with quiet efficiency. They ate. They drank water from their carry supplies. One of them sat on a piece of broken stone and cleaned his equipment with a small cloth, moving the cloth in slow, precise strokes. And Bjorn Halvorsen, the large Norwegian who slept with his hand on his weapon, was humming. Velash had come to recognize the sound. Bjorn hummed when he was content. It was a low, tuneless sort of sound that nonetheless communicated something clear. He had done the thing he came to do, and he was satisfied with the result. Velash opened his channel to the team. "Sergeant Kale," he said, and was surprised at how steady his own voice sounded. "Are you able to report?" "We're good," Kale said. Her voice was calm. She sounded, Velash thought, like someone who had just completed a task that was tiring but not unexpected. 12 up, 12 down. Velash looked at the 12 Vreth life signs still in the tunnels, stationary, grouped together. He ran a check. They were alive, all of them, but they were not moving. "The Shriek cast," he said carefully. "They are alive." "Most of them," Kale said. "But they are not," he hesitated. "They are not functioning." There was a brief pause on the channel. "No," Kale said, "they are not." Velash looked at the sensor data for a long moment. "What did you do down there?" he asked. He was not sure why he asked. He was not sure he actually wanted the answer. The pause that followed was longer than the others. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to answer, but the pause of someone deciding how. "We found out what they were afraid of," Kale said at last. Then Velash heard in the background of the channel Bjorn's humming, quiet and steady and completely unbothered. The channel closed. The report of the Shriek cast's condition reached the Iron Matron within the hour. She read it standing up, which was not something she normally did. She read it twice. Then she asked her intelligence officer to confirm the sensor readings, and he did, and she stood there with the confirmed data in her hand and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not fear, not yet, but the edge of it, the place where the ground starts to slope. She had sent 12 of her finest hunters into the dark after 12 soft, short-lived, unarmored creatures from a species she had dismissed. The hunters were engineered. They were perfected. They had never failed. Every nervous system in the known galaxy responded to their presence with terror. And 12 humans had gone underground to meet them. And the hunters were sitting in the dark, alive but gone, not dead, which she could have understood, but broken in some interior way that her medics could not immediately explain. Whatever the humans had found in them, whatever small thing in the architecture of even an engineered mind that could be reached and taken hold of and turned, they had found it in total darkness, while the Shriek cast's subsonic emission was pressing against them from every direction. She asked for the survival report. All 12 Shriek cast were still registering life signs. She asked if any of them could be redeployed. The answer came back quickly. No, not any of them, not to combat, possibly not to anything. The Iron Matron set down the report. She thought for a long time. Then she called her senior commanders to an emergency council. The Shriek cast was her finest instrument against impossible enemies. She had never had cause to pull them from a field. She had never needed to. She pulled them from the field. All of them, everywhere in the galaxy, they were currently deployed. An emergency recall order that would be noticed by every military intelligence service that monitored Vreth operations. It was the kind of order that sent a message. She knew it. She sent it anyway. And in the pale morning light above the ruins of Verk City, Bjorn Halvorsen finished his meal, put the empty packet carefully away in a pocket of his gear, and kept on humming. The Vreth Dominion's High Command held its emergency council aboard the Matron carrier, the largest ship in their fleet, a vessel so enormous that smaller Vreth warships docked inside it the way a hand closes around a collection of stones. It moved through deep space with a slow, heavy certainty, like something that had never needed to hurry. Inside the war chamber at the ship's core, the 9 high matrons of the Vreth Dominion sat in a half-circle and reviewed data. They were old, all of them. Some had lived for 600 years. They had watched civilizations rise and fall, watched species fight back and eventually fail, watched the slow march of Vreth expansion move across the galaxy one star system at a time. Between them, they had made decisions that had ended worlds. They were not creatures who were easily troubled. But on this day, 3 of them had asked for the emergency council themselves, which had not happened in over 200 years, and the data they were reviewing was making the others understand why. The Kale Prime siege was not lost. The Iron Matron had been careful to say this in her report. 40,000 Vreth soldiers still held the planet. The orbital fleet was still intact. The 2 billion inhabitants were still contained. By every measurable standard, the siege was proceeding. But something was wrong with it. The High Matron who led the council, ancient enough that her armored exterior had taken on a deep, almost black color, spread the full intelligence compilation across the chamber's display surface and said nothing for a long time. She let the others read. The data told a story that made no military sense. 12 humans had been on the surface of Kale Prime for 11 days. In those 11 days, they had not engaged in direct combat with any Vreth unit. They had not taken or held any ground. They had not destroyed any major equipment or infrastructure. And yet the siege, which had been running with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a Vreth operation, had developed what could only be described as a disease. Not physical, not structural, something in the decision-making layer. Commanders were making choices based on orders they were later unable to account for. Patrols were reporting all clear in sectors that showed signs of activity. Communication relays were functioning, but the data flowing through them had been subtly adjusted in ways that took careful analysis to detect. And the intelligence commander, one of their best, a veteran of 40 campaigns, was sitting in a medical facility making sounds and refusing to speak. Then there was the Shriek Cast report. The old matron had read this 3 times. She was reading it again now. 12 Shriek Cast, sent into the tunnels after the human operators, alive when they emerged, non-functional, and the humans had come out the other side, dark with the fluid of things that were not human, and had immediately sat down and eaten their meals. She put down the report and looked at her council. "They are not soldiers," she said. The others waited. "I have reviewed human military data extensively in the past 11 days, she continued. "Their military is large. They have ground forces, fleet forces, engineering corps, medical corps. They have many categories of soldier." She paused. "These 12 are from a category that humans call in translation special forces. Elite units within their military that are selected from the best of their regular soldiers and then subjected to additional training. Years of it. Training designed to push them past every limit the human body and mind has." Another matron spoke. "What does this mean for the siege?" "It means," the old one said, "that we have been watching the wrong thing. We have been watching 12 individuals and thinking about what 12 individuals can do." She folded her old hands carefully. "We should have been asking why a species sends 12 individuals to a 40,000-soldier siege in the first place." "Silence. These are not their army," she said. "These are the ones their army produces perhaps 12 of in a good year, the ones selected for selection programs, beings who have spent years being broken and rebuilt specifically to function in conditions that would destroy normal soldiers." She looked at the report of the Shriek Cast encounter. Conditions like this. One of the younger high matrons, young being a relative term, at perhaps 280 years, leaned forward. "Are you saying their army is behind these 12? "Their army has not been deployed," the old matron said. "We are fighting their scouts, their advance element, 12 beings that their own military considers extraordinary enough to send alone to a situation their regular forces could not handle." She let that sit in the chamber. "And we have not stopped them," she said. "In 11 days, with 40,000 soldiers in the Shriek cast, we have not stopped 12 of them." The chamber was very quiet. Back on Kale Prime, the 12 operators were doing something that looked unremarkable but was, in fact, the beginning of the end. They had received the intelligence from the listening device on the Iron Matron's command post. Every order she had given in the past 72 hours, every adjustment to security protocols, every countermeasure she had put in place in response to what she thought the humans were doing. Kale spread the data out and walked her team through it in quiet, specific language. She pointed to patterns. She identified gaps. She noted where the Iron Matron had guessed correctly and where she had guessed wrong. The Iron Matron was, Kale acknowledged, very good. She was responding with speed and intelligence to an enemy she did not fully understand, and she was adjusting the right things. In a different scenario, against a different enemy, those adjustments might have worked. But the listening device meant that Kale knew what adjustments were coming before they were fully implemented. She knew which patrol routes were being changed before they changed. She knew which communication frequencies were being shifted before they shifted. She was, in a very real sense, fighting a battle where she could see both her own hand and her opponent's. She gave her team their assignments for the next 72 hours. What followed was something that conclave historians later called the quiet rout. At the time it was happening, it was invisible. There were no battle lines shifting, no large engagements, no dramatic moments that could be seen from orbit. It looked like nothing. But the Vreth siege was quietly, steadily bleeding. Units that were meant to reinforce certain positions never arrived, not because they were attacked, but because a series of small, cascading errors in their orders sent them to the wrong locations. Supply convoys that should have been resupplying the front sectors found themselves redirected to areas where they were not needed, leaving front units short on energy cells and food supplies. A critical communication hub at the center of the Vreth operation went offline for 6 hours at the exact moment when it was most needed, because a small component inside it had been removed and replaced with a nearly identical one that would fail under load. And through it all, the Iron Matron was receiving intelligence from her commanders about what was happening, but that intelligence was arriving slightly wrong, slightly delayed, slightly adjusted, not enough to be obvious, enough to matter. She was trying to see the battlefield through a window that had been subtly warped, and every decision she made based on what she saw was slightly off from what it needed to be. She knew it. That was the worst part. She could feel the wrongness in her operation the way you can feel a bone that has been reset but not quite correctly. Everything worked. Nothing worked quite right. She began a staged retreat from 3 sectors. She told herself it was tactical repositioning, which it was, partially. She was pulling units back to consolidate them, to create a stronger defensive core that would be harder to manipulate. It was a sound military decision. But it was also, though she would not have said this aloud, a response to something she could not name, a feeling that had been building in her for 11 days, a pressure from a direction she could not identify, something that made her want to pull her forces closer together, the way a living creature pulls in its limbs when it senses danger from all sides. Conclave Command celebrated the retreat as a victory. Velash watched the celebrations from his station and felt something complicated. He was glad the retreat was happening. He was also aware that Sergeant Kale had specifically requested permission to pursue the retreating forces and been denied. He was aware that Kale had then gone quiet on the communication channel for a while. He was not entirely surprised on the following morning when the human life signs disappeared from his sensors. The 3 days that followed the retreat were not in any Vreth report. They would be pieced together later by intelligence analysts from 5 different species, working from sensor data and the accounts of the few Vreth survivors who were willing to speak. The picture that emerged was this: a retreating army of 40,000. Moving along 3 planned routes toward a consolidation point, began experiencing losses, not from battle, not from any force they could identify or engage. Equipment failed at key moments. Route markers were subtly altered, sending columns down paths that added hours to their travel. Bridges that had been scouted as structurally sound were found on approach to be no longer reliable. Commanders who were supposed to be coordinating between columns stopped communicating, not because the communications equipment failed, but because the signals were being redirected. And through it all, out in the dark between broken buildings and ruined roads, and the ash of a burning city, 12 life signs moved with the patient, unhurried certainty of people who knew exactly where they were going and exactly how much time they had. By the end of the 3rd day, the staged retreat had collapsed into something else. 40,000 soldiers who had begun as a coordinated force were now a fragmented, disoriented collection of units that had lost confidence in their orders, their routes, and most dangerously in each other. The Vreth carrier in orbit above Kale Prime began emergency extraction operations. The siege of Kale Prime was over. It was Velash who intercepted the communication. He almost missed it. It was not sent through any of the standard Vreth military channels. It came through a frequency that was technically open but almost never used, in a cipher that took his team 4 hours to break, not because it was complex, but because it was old, older than the current war. A code that the Vreth had used for a very different kind of message, in an era when such messages were occasionally necessary. When his team finished decoding it and brought it to him, Velash read it once. Then he read it again. Then he sat very still for approximately 3 minutes, doing nothing except processing what he had read. He called Admiral Shavath and General Ferrith to his station and showed them the decoded message on his display. He did not speak while they read it. He watched their faces instead. Shavath's expression moved through several things in quick succession: disbelief, then a careful rereading, then something that was not quite awe but was close to it. Ferrith simply stared at the screen for a long time without moving. The message was addressed not to the Conclave government, not to the Conclave military command, not to any fleet admiral or planetary governor. It was addressed, in a way that was specific and deliberate and clearly intentional, to the 12 humans. And it said, translated from Vreth military code into common galactic language: "We named you, we will remember you. We ask only, do not follow us home." The conclave chamber erupted. Not in celebration, in a kind of stunned, collective noise that was not quite any one emotion but something made from all of them pressed together. In 600 years of Vreth dominion expansion, they had never retreated voluntarily. They had never sent a message like this. They had never acknowledged a smaller force as something worthy of. The word that kept being used in the chamber was acknowledgement. As if acknowledgement was a currency that the Vreth had never spent before, and the spending of it meant something enormous. Velash stood at his station and watched the chamber react and thought about 12 people somewhere on the surface below, probably eating from small packets and cleaning their equipment, probably not even aware yet that the enemy they had just pushed off a planet had asked them, specifically and only them, to please stop. He opened his channel to Sergeant Kale. "Sergeant," he said, "there is something you should see." He transmitted the decoded message. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Kale's voice came back, quiet and even. "Noted," she said. Another pause. "Are we being extracted?" she asked. "Yes," Velash said, "as soon as you return to the extraction point." "Copy that," she said. "We're on our way." Velash kept the channel open for a moment longer than necessary. He wasn't sure why. "Sergeant," he said, "how does it feel, knowing that the Vreth sent a message like that?" The pause was longer this time. "It feels like work we did that we won't have to do again," Kale said. "At least not here." The channel closed. In the war chamber of the matron carrier, far above the atmosphere of Kale Prime, the old High Matron was still sitting in the same position she had been in for the past several hours. Her council had departed. The chamber was quiet. She was alone with a display screen showing the withdrawal of her forces from a planet they had held for 11 days before 12 humans had made holding it impossible. She was thinking about what she had said in the council. She was thinking about the word scouts. She was thinking, if these are their scouts and they do this, then what exactly does their army do? She had no answer. For the first time in a very long time, she did not want one. The conclave chamber had not been this loud in 60 years. Not since the first Vreth fleet crossed the border into conclave space, and 6 member species watched in real time as a colony world was reduced to rubble in less than 3 days. That had been a noise of fear and shock. This noise was different, harder to name, made up of too many things pressed together to untangle easily. There was relief. After 60 years of war, something had happened that had never happened before. The Vreth had retreated, voluntarily, from a world they held and could have continued to hold by any conventional military calculation. There was confusion, because the cause of that retreat was 12 people. And underneath both of those things, spreading slowly through the chamber like cold water finding its level, there was something that several senior conclave officials would later describe, privately and with some embarrassment, as fear. Not fear of the Vreth, something else. Admiral Shaveth stood at the front of the chamber and waited for the noise to settle. It took longer than usual. He was patient. He had spent decades learning patience, and 11 days watching 12 humans operate on the surface of a burning planet had reinforced that the most important things usually required it. When the chamber was quiet enough, he spoke. "Before we discuss the withdrawal," he said, "I want to present the full intelligence report compiled by Officer Velash, whose observation of the human team throughout this operation has been detailed and thorough." He paused. "I want to present it in full because I believe that what happened on Kale Prime is being understood incorrectly, and I think it is important that this chamber understands it correctly before we decide what comes next." He gave the floor to Velash. Velash had spent 2 days writing the report. He was careful with language. He always was, but on this occasion he was more careful than usual, because he was aware that the words he chose would be read by more people than any report he had written before, and because he wanted to be precise about something that was not entirely precise by nature. The report was titled, simply, "What exactly are human special forces?" He had debated the title for a long time. It was unusual to title a military intelligence report with a question. Reports were supposed to contain answers, but he had decided in the end that the question was more honest than any answer he could have given, because the truth was that after 11 days of close observation, he was not sure he fully knew what he had been watching. He presented the report in sections. He covered the tactical phase, the manipulation of Vreth communications, the false orders, the careful herding of enemy units. He covered the psychological phase, the intelligence commander left broken in his office, the shriek cast sitting unresponsive in the dark. He covered the operational phase, the quiet rout, the collapse of the staged retreat, the final withdrawal of Vreth forces. Then he reached the section he had spent the most time writing, and he read it to the chamber directly. "Human Special Forces units," he said, reading from his prepared text, "are selected from the broader human military through a series of tests and evaluations that eliminate, on average, 80 to 90% of candidates. The specific units represented in this operation have attrition rates in their selection programs that approach 95%. What this means is that for every 100 humans who attempt to qualify for these units, approximately 5 succeed. He let the chamber absorb that number. Those who succeed then undergo years of additional training in infiltration, in psychological operations, in survival under extreme conditions, in the use of fear and deception as weapons. They are trained to function in environments that would cause the breakdown of a normal soldier. They are trained specifically to operate alone or in small numbers against larger forces. They are trained to find the gaps in an enemy's thinking and to move through those gaps before the enemy can close them. He paused. What we observed on Kale Prime was not an extraordinary event, he said. This is what these units do. This is what they were built to do and what they have been doing on their own planet against each other for most of their species' recorded history. He looked up from the text. Against each other, he said again more quietly. Humans have been doing this to other humans for centuries, long before they went to space, long before they joined the conclave. This is not something they developed for us. We are not special. We are simply the current problem. The chamber was very still. I have one more section, he said, and I want the chamber to hear it clearly. He looked back at his text. These 12 individuals represent the highest tier of human military capability, but they are not unique in kind. There are more of them. Across the various special forces programs of the human military, there are several thousand individuals operating at a broadly comparable level, with varying specializations. Behind them are the human regular military forces, numbering in the tens of millions, that have never been deployed against an external enemy. He paused. The Vreth Dominion has been fighting human special forces for 11 days on one planet. They have not yet met the human army. He closed the report. My final note, he said, is this. The Vreth sent a message addressed not to the conclave, not to any government or military authority, but to the 12 individuals directly. They asked those 12 specifically to not follow them home. He looked around the chamber. I believe we should think carefully about what it means that one of the most powerful conquest empires in galactic history, facing an opponent for the first time, chose to direct their concern not at our fleets, not at our armies, but at 12 people they had known for 11 days. He stepped back. The room was silent for a long time. Then a Duvani council member, a species known for dry, precise thinking, said the sentence that Velash would later describe as the most honest thing said in the entire proceeding. We have been afraid of the wrong humans. The extraction was unremarkable. No ceremony had been arranged, because Sergeant Kale had been asked if she wanted one and had said no. She had said it the way she said most things, not rudely, not dismissively, just with the flat certainty of someone who had already moved on to thinking about other things. The 12 operators arrived at the extraction point in the gray morning light of Kale Prime, 11 days after they had stepped off the ramp of their black transport. They looked like people who had been working hard in difficult conditions for 11 days, because that was what they were. Their gear was worn and marked from use. They moved with the controlled ease of people whose bodies had been pushed hard and were beginning to feel it, but who would not admit that out loud. Velash was at the extraction point. He had arranged to be there, though he was not entirely sure why. He told himself it was for a final observational note. He knew it was something else. He watched them organize themselves and their equipment with the same quiet efficiency they brought to everything. He watched Bjorn eat the last of a ration packet and fold the empty casing into a pocket with the care of someone who always cleaned up after themselves. He watched Ghost Rains check and recheck his equipment one final time, methodical as always. He watched Yeva Morozova tighten a strap on her pack with a precise, practiced movement, and then test it, and then leave it alone. He walked to where Sergeant Kale was standing at the edge of the extraction area, looking out at what remained of Verk City. In the middle distance, the pale blue mineral of the old buildings caught the morning light in a way that was, despite everything, still beautiful. The fires had died down. The Vreth were gone. The city was broken and quiet and still, and the sky above it was the deep, clear gray blue of early morning on a world that had survived something that many had believed it would not. Velash stood beside Kale and looked at the same view. "I have submitted my report," he said. "I know," she said. "I was told." "It will be read by every senior member of the conclave," he said. She nodded slightly. She seemed neither pleased nor displeased by this. He stood quietly for a moment, trying to find the thing he wanted to say. He had been trying to find it since the first day, when he had watched them walk off the ramp and felt the fur on the back of his neck stand up. He had been trying to find it through 11 days of watching things happen that he had not known were possible. "How do you carry it?" he asked. The question came out more directly than he had planned. All of it, everything you have seen and done and become, everything that training does to a person, and then everything that using that training does. How do you carry it and still be, he paused, still be the way you are? Kale turned her head slightly and looked at him. Her dark eyes were calm, the way deep water is calm, not empty, but not disturbed by anything on the surface. She looked at her team, Bjorn, who was humming again, Ghost, who was finishing his equipment check with a faint expression of satisfaction, Yeva, who had found a spot of clear ground and was doing stretches with the focused practicality of someone who understood exactly what her body needed. "We don't carry it," Kale said. She looked back at the city. "We put it down between jobs," she said. "That's the thing, you put it down, you eat something, you sleep, you check your gear, you talk to the people around you about small things, what you're going to eat when you get back, whether Bjorn snores too loudly, who owes who money from the last card game." She paused. "And then when the next job comes, you pick it back up." Velash thought about this. "And if it gets too heavy?" he asked. Kale was quiet for a moment. "Then you put it down for longer," she said, "and you find someone who can help you set it down right." Her voice was steady, but there was something real underneath it. "We're not machines. We feel it, all of it. We just have tools for it." Velash nodded slowly. The transport was ready. The crew signaled. Kale turned away from the city and walked toward the ramp. The others fell in around her without being called, the way a group moves when it has spent enough time together to function as something more than a collection of individuals. Velash stood where he was. At the ramp, Kale paused. She turned back and looked at him. "Your report was good," she said. "Fair." "I tried to be accurate," he said. "You were." She looked at him for a moment. "Look after the planet. There are people coming back here eventually. They're going to need the infrastructure repaired and the water systems checked. The Eastern Tunnel network will need to be sealed in sections. The structural integrity is compromised in places." He stared at her. She had, in the 11 days she had been on the surface, apparently also cataloged the infrastructure damage of the city with enough detail to make specific engineering recommendations. He didn't know why he was surprised. "I will pass that along," he said. She nodded once, stepped up the ramp and was gone. The transport sealed. It rose. It cleared the atmosphere in silence and was swallowed by the black of space above Kale Prime, growing smaller until it was nothing, and then was nothing at all. Somewhere across the galaxy, in a deep place that light did not reach easily, there was a temple. It was Vreth, old enough that no one alive could say with certainty when it had been built. Its walls were black stone, carved with the marks of every enemy the Vreth Dominion had ever faced, and faced significantly enough to name. Most of the marks were trophies, records of conquest, records of species overcome and absorbed or destroyed. They were carved with pride. Some of the marks were different. Some were warnings. In the old language, carved deep into stone that had stood for 600 years, there were names that the Vreth had placed there not to celebrate their own victory, but to remember, and to warn those who came after, that some enemies were not to be underestimated. Some enemies had made the Dominion bleed. Some enemies had made the Dominion stop and reconsider, which was a rarer and more serious thing. These names were carved differently from the others, smaller, in a corner of the temple that was not shown to visitors. The marks of things that had not been conquered, the marks of things that were remembered not as trophies but as lessons. On a night shortly after the withdrawal from Kale Prime, a new carving was added to that section of wall. Not one name, 12. 12 marks placed carefully, one beside another, in stone that would outlast the people who had carved them and the people they named. They were not placed there to celebrate those 12. They were not placed there to mourn. They were placed there because the Vreth, who had been in the business of understanding enemies for 6 centuries, understood something that many species did not. Some things needed to be remembered not because they had happened, but because they might happen again, and the ones who came after needed to know. The stone was cold under the carving tool. The temple was dark and quiet. Outside its walls, the galaxy went on the way it always had, loud and complicated and full of conflict, with new threats rising and old ones fading, and the long, slow work of survival continuing across 1,000 worlds. And in the dark between the stars, something had shifted. Not a border, not a political arrangement, not a treaty or alliance or any of the formal structures that species use to manage their relationships with each other. Something quieter than that. Something that moved through the galaxy the way certain stories move, person to person, species to species, told and retold until the facts become secondary to the feeling they carry. The story was this. Humanity had sent 12 people to a 40,000-soldier siege, and when it was over, the 40,000 had left and the 12 had not. And the part of the story that people kept coming back to, the part that stayed in the mind after the telling was done, was not the tactics or the psychology or the specific events in the tunnels. It was something smaller, a detail that Velesh had included almost as an afterthought in the final section of his report. When the 12 operators had emerged from the tunnels after 6 hours in the dark, with the shriek cast creatures that had broken armies, one of them had been humming. Not performing, not demonstrating anything, just humming a small, tuneless song to himself in the morning light, the way a person does when the day's work is finished and they are, all things considered, doing fine. The galaxy did not know what to do with that detail. It turned out the detail was the truest part of the whole story. Humanity had many soldiers. It had armies and fleets and all the heavy machinery of war that a species accumulates over centuries of conflict. It had weapons and tactics and a military history as long and complicated as any in the Conclave. But what it also had, what it had quietly built, over generations of selecting and training and pushing human beings to the far edge of what a human being could be, were people who could go into the dark, after the worst things the galaxy could produce, do what needed to be done, come out the other side, and then sit down and have their lunch. That was the part that stayed. That was the part that made even hell stay silent. And high above Kale Prime, in the black between stars, a small dark transport moved through the quiet of space, carrying 12 people who were not thinking about the galaxy's fear or the Vreth's message or the words being spoken in the conclave chamber below. They were thinking about sleep and food and whether Bjorn's humming was technically a violation of the noise rules for the crew compartment and what came next. There was always something that came next. They were ready.